Angela was ready to prove herself at Lakeside Hospital, but the welcome she received was cold and the challenges went beyond patient care. From condescending colleagues to subtle, cutting remarks, every day pushed her resolve. But a powerful presence was watching. Mr. Thomas King, a patient with quiet influence and a heart for justice. Witnessing Angela's dedication in the face of discrimination, he knew she could be a force for good. In this powerful story, we follow Angela's journey from isolation to empowerment as she becomes an unexpected catalyst for lasting change. Stay tuned to see how one person's resilience can inspire a legacy, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more inspiring stories. As the sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the city, Angela Brooks adjusted her crisp white coat and took a steadying breath. She stood outside Lakeside General Hospital, its sleek, glass-fronted building a testament to its reputation as one of the top hospitals in the state. For Angela, this was not just another job, it was a hard-earned opportunity. Her new role was a major step forward in her nursing career. Yet with each step she took closer to the hospital doors, a quiet apprehension flickered beneath her calm exterior. Angela had learned resilience early in life. Growing up in a small town, her mother had instilled in her a strong sense of purpose, reminding her that being both a woman and a Black professional meant she would have to work twice as hard. "You're carrying more than your own dreams, Angela," her mother used to say, her voice steady and warm. "You're paving a path for others." Angela had taken those words to heart. She'd worked her way through nursing school, often balancing two jobs, studying late into the night, and graduating at the top of her class. After years of experience, she was finally here at Lakeside, ready to make a difference in the lives of her patients. As she pushed open the heavy glass doors, she squared her shoulders and held her head high, reminding herself that she had earned her place here. The hospital's lobby was bustling with activity. Nurses, doctors, and patients moved with purpose, each one seemingly immersed in their own world. The pristine white floors gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights, and the air was thick with the scent of antiseptics. Angela approached the nurses' station, her heart beating a little faster. It was her first day, and she wanted to make a good impression. "Hello, I'm Angela Brooks, the new nurse," she introduced herself, her voice calm but carrying an edge of excitement. The nurse behind the desk looked up briefly, her gaze cool and indifferent. "Oh, the new hire," she murmured, her tone polite but lacking warmth. "Head nurse Carol Wilson will be with you shortly." With that, she returned to her paperwork, offering Angela no further acknowledgement. Angela smiled politely, though she felt the chill in the nurse's response. She had expected a warmer welcome, but she reminded herself that it was only her first day. Perhaps the staff here simply needed time to get to know her. A few minutes later, a tall, stern woman with a clipboard approached her. "Ms. Brooks, I presume," she said, barely glancing up as she scanned through Angela's paperwork. "I'm head nurse Carol Wilson. Let's get you started with orientation." Angela followed Carol through the maze of hallways as she introduced her to various hospital departments. The head nurse's tone was brisk, her manner efficient. Angela listened carefully, taking mental notes, eager to prove herself. As they moved from one section of the hospital to another, she noticed how the staff seemed to go out of their way to avoid making eye contact with her. A few cast glances that lingered a moment too long, their expressions unreadable. She felt the weight of those gazes but brushed it off, attributing it to her newness in the hospital. Their final stop was in the bustling surgical wing, where Carol introduced Angela to Dr. William Graves, one of the hospital's most respected surgeons. Angela knew his name. His reputation for skill and precision was well known, as was his strict demeanor. "Dr. Graves, this is Nurse Angela Brooks, our new addition," Carol said. Dr. Graves looked up, his steel-gray eyes sweeping over Angela in a single assessing glance. His expression remained impassive, and he extended a brief, unenthusiastic nod. "Welcome to Lakeside, Nurse Brooks," he said, his voice flat. "I trust you're familiar with our protocols here. We maintain high standards." Angela felt a twinge of disappointment at his lukewarm reception, but forced herself to smile and respond confidently. "Yes, Dr. Graves, I'm fully trained in all hospital protocols, and I'm eager to uphold Lakeside's standards." Dr. Graves raised an eyebrow slightly, his gaze cool and appraising. "We'll see," he murmured before returning his attention to his work. Carol moved on, leading Angela to the break room for a brief pause. She handed Angela a folder of materials to review before the start of her shift. As Angela took a seat at the small table, her mind drifted back to her training, the countless hours of study and the sacrifices she'd made to reach this point. She had worked hard, and though her new colleagues seemed reserved, she reminded herself that first impressions often took time to warm up. Angela glanced up as two nurses walked past the break room door, their conversation dropping to a whisper as they caught sight of her. She saw them exchange a look before moving on, their voices picking up again once they thought they were out of earshot. It was subtle, but Angela felt it, the undercurrent of tension. She had encountered these unspoken barriers before, but she was determined not to let them define her experience at Lakeside. Later that afternoon, Angela's first shift began. She moved from patient to patient, her skill and compassion evident in each interaction. She was thorough and attentive, double-checking charts, adjusting medications, and offering words of comfort where needed. Some patients responded warmly, while others were distant, but Angela's resolve remained steady. She was here to provide care, and nothing would stand in the way of that commitment. As her shift came to a close, Angela felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had navigated the day's challenges and shown herself capable even if her colleagues weren't fully welcoming. As she gathered her belongings, she couldn't help but overhear two nurses talking nearby. "Did you see the new nurse? Seems a bit out of place here, don't you think?" one whispered. "Yeah," the other replied, her voice barely audible. "Not exactly what you'd expect for Lakeside, is she?" Angela's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral as she passed by, her chin held high. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of her strength and purpose. She knew that being here was about more than just herself. It was a chance to pave the way for others, to show that talent and dedication could overcome prejudice. As Angela walked out of the hospital that evening, the sky turning shades of pink and gold, she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her day's experiences settle over her. She was certain of one thing. She would return tomorrow with her head held high, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Angela's second day at Lakeside Hospital began with a renewed sense of purpose despite the chilly reception she had received on her first day. She had resolved that today would be different. If there was one thing she knew about herself, it was that she could weather challenges and rise above. Yet as she entered the hospital's bustling lobby, that glimmer of optimism began to fade as she noticed a few pairs of eyes flicker towards her, only to turn away just as quickly. She forced herself to smile and keep moving, reminding herself that trust was built over time. Angela moved through her early morning rounds with care, double-checking patient records and ensuring each bed was properly attended. As she tended to her first patient, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, she noticed a nurse lingering in the doorway, watching her with a subtle yet unmistakable look of scrutiny. When Angela glanced up, the nurse quickly looked away, returning to the nearby station. Angela tried to brush it off, telling herself it was natural for colleagues to observe a new team member's work, especially in such a high-pressure environment. But as she went about her rounds, the whispers and sidelong glances became harder to ignore. When Angela reached the nurse's station to check in on patient assignments, she overheard a quiet conversation between two of her colleagues, Sarah and Jennifer, who seemed unaware of her presence behind them. "Can you believe they hired her?" Sarah's voice held a touch of disdain. "It's Lakeside, not some community clinic. Standards should mean something." Jennifer replied, her tone dismissive. "It's probably just for diversity points. Hospitals are all about image these days." Angela's heart sank. The words were all too familiar, ones she'd heard in whispers and mutterings in other jobs, in other settings. She took a steadying breath, reminding herself not to let them get to her. But as she stepped up to the station, both women fell silent, exchanging a knowing glance before dispersing with a half-hearted smile in her direction. "Everything all right here?" she asked, keeping her tone light and professional. "Of course, just discussing schedules," Sarah replied with a faint smile, but her gaze remained cool. Despite the chilly undercurrent, Angela smiled back and continued with her work, refusing to let it show that their words had reached her. But with each patient she saw, each interaction she had, she could feel the weight of those subtle prejudices pressing down on her. a constant reminder that she would have to fight twice as hard to prove herself. Her day continued with few words exchanged between her and the other nurses. Whenever she needed assistance, her requests seemed to go unheard or delayed, and at times, her colleagues would step in only after she'd already finished the task herself. Angela stayed calm, doing her best to adapt, but as the day wore on, her initial optimism began to fray. Later that afternoon, Dr. Graves, the stern surgeon she had met the previous day, approached her as she checked a patient's vitals. His presence seemed to command a hush in the hallway, and Angela straightened, bracing herself. "Nurse Brooks," he said, his voice neutral yet edged with the same condescension she'd sensed before. "I trust you're settling in well?" "Yes, Dr. Graves," Angela replied, choosing her words carefully. "I'm adjusting to the protocols here and making sure to meet Lakeside's high standards." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over her with a hint of skepticism. "We maintain very specific procedures for a reason. I expect you to familiarize yourself with them thoroughly," he said. "Lakeside is known for excellence, and we can't afford any lapses in quality." Angela's stomach tightened. She forced a smile and nodded. "I understand, Dr. Graves. I assure you I'm committed to maintaining the highest standards in patient care." Without another word, he nodded curtly and moved on, leaving her standing by the patient's bedside. She had expected a challenging environment, but the constant need to prove herself felt overwhelming. It was clear that her knowledge and experience weren't being questioned because of her qualifications, but because of something deeper, something unspoken, yet obvious. After Dr. Graves left, Angela couldn't help but notice the nurse from earlier, Jennifer, returning to the station nearby. Catching Angela's eye, Jennifer gave her a half smile and asked, "How are you finding Lakeside so far?" Angela paused, wondering if this was a genuine question or just another test. "It's a bit different than I expected," she admitted carefully, deciding to be honest. Jennifer nodded, her expression unreadable. "It's a big adjustment for new hires. It takes time to really become part of the team." Angela forced a polite nod, though her heart sank. The implication was clear enough. She wasn't considered a real part of the team yet, and she'd have to work even harder to earn that standing. As the day wore on, she began to recognize the pattern of prejudice woven through every interaction. The way patients seemed surprised to see her walk into their rooms, asking if she was just a student or there to assist the real nurse. The way other staff seemed to go out of their way to avoid addressing her directly or questioning her authority. It was as though every glance, every whisper was a test of her endurance, one she was determined not to fail. As she finally wrapped up her shift, Angela gathered her things from the staff room, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. Her mind was a whirl of emotions, anger, frustration, and a deep sense of isolation. She had known that it wouldn't be easy, that she would likely encounter resistance, but nothing had prepared her for the quiet hostility she'd felt from all sides. Just as she stepped out of the hospital, Angela's phone buzzed. It was her mother calling, and the sound of her familiar voice brought a small, much-needed smile to Angela's face. "Hey, baby girl," her mother greeted her, her voice warm and comforting. "How was day 2? Angela hesitated, not wanting to worry her mother, but then, in a quieter voice, she admitted, "It's harder than I thought, Mama. The people there, they aren't exactly welcoming." Her mother's tone softened, filled with understanding. "Baby, remember what I told you. You're there because you've earned it, because you're strong, and because you have a purpose. Don't let them make you question that." "I know, Mama," Angela whispered, her eyes welling up with unspent frustration. "I just didn't think it would feel this heavy." "You've got this, Angela, one day at a time. You're carrying more than just your own dreams. You're opening doors for those who'll come after you. Keep your head up, keep doing your best, and don't let them see you waver." Taking a deep breath, Angela felt the strength return to her voice. "Thank you, Mama. I needed to hear that." After the call ended, Angela slipped her phone into her bag and took one last look at the imposing structure of Lakeside Hospital. She wasn't going to let prejudice dictate her worth, not here and not anywhere. Tomorrow was a new day, and she would meet it with her head held high, ready to prove, most importantly to herself, that she belonged. Angela arrived at Lakeside Hospital the next morning with determination, ready for whatever the day held. She had already adjusted to the subtle comments, distant stares, and cold professionalism that seemed to follow her every move. But this day was different. There was an unusual buzz at the nurses' station. Colleagues exchanged whispers and quick glances in her direction. Angela approached one of the nurses to find out what was going on. "Oh, you didn't hear?" the nurse replied, her voice tinged with excitement. "We're getting a VIP today. Thomas Grayson, the CEO of Grayson Holdings." Angela's surprise showed for just a moment. Grayson Holdings was a powerful name, famous for its ventures in real estate, philanthropy, and numerous city projects. Although she tried to remain professional, the sense of change in the air was infectious. A high-profile patient would likely bring added pressure, but Angela was resolved to treat him with the same care and respect she gave to each patient. Hours later, Mr. Grayson arrived, flanked by assistants and hospital staff. Even in a wheelchair, he had a commanding presence. His well-tailored suit and piercing gaze projected confidence, and Angela knew right away that he was no ordinary patient. Assigned to care for Mr. Grayson, Angela took a deep breath before stepping into his room. She found him seated comfortably, observing the room with a calm, appraising look. As she introduced herself, he responded with genuine politeness and then asked, "How long have you been at Lakeside?" "Just about a week," Angela replied, her tone professional yet warm. "And how are you finding it here?" he asked with a measured curiosity. His eyes seemed to hold a deeper meaning, as if he knew more about her situation than she'd realized. Angela chose her words carefully. "It's been an adjustment. I came here to be a part of Lakeside's high standards, and I'm doing my best to meet those every day." Mr. Grayson nodded slowly, a faint smile touching his face. "Excellence does take resilience," he said, almost as if he was hinting at her experience. His words hung in the air, both encouraging and disarming. Then Angela continued her routine checks and made sure he was comfortable before moving on to her other patients. Over the next few days, Angela sensed Mr. Grayson's watchful attention whenever she was in his room. He was observant, yet patient, often asking questions about her background and what had led her to nursing. During one of her visits, he asked suddenly, "What inspired you to go into nursing, Angela?" "Since I was young, I always wanted to make a difference in people's lives," she replied sincerely. "I believe that compassionate care is just as essential as medical treatment itself." His response was thoughtful, almost admiring. It's rare to see someone who truly embodies that compassion, and it's not always easy to practice it in places like these. Angela's heart skipped slightly at his words. There it was again, an implication that he understood her challenges. She offered a polite smile, feeling both validated and slightly unsettled. She finished her tasks and returned to her rounds. Later that day, Angela overheard her colleagues speculating in hushed tones. "Do you think Mr. Grayson's here to make a big donation?" one nurse asked. "Could be," another replied. "But I heard he's been asking about the staff experience here. Maybe he's looking into the hospital itself." Angela's curiosity grew, but she focused on her duties. That evening, she made her final check-in with Mr. Grayson, who greeted her with a knowing look, as though he had been waiting just for her. "You strike me as someone who's faced her share of challenges," he said quietly. Angela's pulse quickened, unsure how to respond to such a direct statement. She nodded slightly. "Challenges are part of life, I suppose. But some are more persistent than others." Mr. Grayson held her gaze with sympathy. "True strength isn't just in enduring challenges, but in confronting them head-on," he replied. "Places like this can sometimes be blinded by legacy. Real change often requires someone willing to disrupt the status quo." Angela was taken aback, feeling as if he understood far more about her struggles than he was letting on. She wasn't sure how to respond, sensing that his words held a deeper significance she couldn't quite grasp yet. As she wished him good night, he gave her a final, lingering look. "I'm here for observation, Angela," he said with a calm intensity. "But in more ways than one, you've given me a lot to think about." Leaving his room, Angela felt a flicker of hope, a hint of solidarity in Mr. Grayson's words that she hadn't expected. Perhaps she wasn't entirely alone in her struggle at Lakeside after all. Angela's second week at Lakeside Hospital had been filled with late nights, patient emergencies, and a persistent sense of exclusion. She continued to receive the toughest assignments, and whispers and quiet judgment seemed to follow her down the halls. But her resolve remained firm. If there was one thing Angela was not going to do, it was to give up. One chilly morning, as Angela reviewed patient charts at the nurses' station, she noticed a commotion down the hall. Nurses and doctors were moving hurriedly, and the tension in the air was palpable. Word quickly spread. One of the ICU patients had experienced sudden complications, and Dr. Matthews, the hospital's chief surgeon, was scheduled to lead the operation. The upcoming procedure was high risk, and several board members were expected to observe. Angela was quietly preparing for her rounds when unexpectedly Dr. Matthews approached her. "Angela," he said curtly, his tone barely masking his skepticism, "I'll need you in the operating room. We'll see if you can handle a real test today." Angela nodded, hiding her surprise. She knew this assignment was significant, one typically reserved for more senior nurses. Dr. Matthews' tone made it clear that her involvement was as much a test as it was an assignment. She took a steadying breath, determined to give her best despite his obvious doubt. The operating room was a controlled chaos of machines and sharp tools, doctors and nurses moving swiftly to prepare. Angela scrubbed in, the weight of the situation pressing on her as she entered the sterile space. The atmosphere was tense, with Dr. Matthews already in place and a handful of board members peering through the observation window. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was under a microscope. As the surgery commenced, Angela remained focused, anticipating the needs of the surgical team and delivering tools before anyone had to ask. The patient was in a precarious state, and every move required meticulous care. Dr. Matthews worked quickly, but as the surgery progressed, Angela noticed something troubling. Dr. Matthews was about to make a crucial incision when Angela's eyes caught a minor but significant detail in the patient's chart, an indication that the approach he was about to take might worsen the patient's condition. Her heart pounded as she debated what to do. She knew speaking up could be seen as insubordinate, especially in a setting like this. But if she said nothing, the patient might suffer serious harm. Summoning her courage, Angela spoke up, her voice steady but clear. "Dr. Matthews," she said, "I believe the chart indicates a different approach may be safer in this case." The room went silent. All eyes turned to her, and Angela felt the weight of their judgment. Dr. Matthews' gaze was sharp, his jaw clenched. "Are you questioning my judgment, nurse?" he asked, his tone icier than ever. Angela didn't flinch. "No, doctor, just offering a suggestion based on the patient's file. I'm here to help any way I can." The tension in the room was suffocating. For a brief, agonizing moment, Angela thought she had overstepped. But Dr. Matthews hesitated, his expression flickering as he considered her words. After a tense pause, he muttered under his breath, adjusted his stance, and approached the surgery from a new angle. The next few minutes felt like hours, but as the surgery proceeded, it became clear that the new approach had reduced the risk of complications. The patient's vitals stabilized, and the tension in the room eased. Angela's relief was short-lived, however, as Dr. Matthews barely acknowledged her input, finishing the procedure without a word in her direction. After the surgery, as Angela cleaned up the operating room, she overheard two doctors talking nearby. "Can you believe she corrected Matthews?" one of them whispered. "That takes guts." The other doctor scoffed. "It was lucky, that's all. You won't see her on an assignment like that again." Angela's heart sank, but she brushed off the comments. She had made the right call for the patient, and that was what mattered most. Just as she was gathering her things, the door opened, and Thomas Grayson, her observant patient from earlier, walked in, escorted by an assistant. He had apparently observed part of the surgery from the viewing room. "Nurse Brooks," Mr. Grayson said, nodding at her. "You demonstrated commendable bravery today." Angela was momentarily speechless. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she replied, her voice steady. "I only wanted to help the patient." He gave her a look of understanding. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "helping patients means challenging expectations. But it's also the first step toward making real change." Angela couldn't quite understand his words, but she sensed there was something significant in them. Mr. Grayson's unwavering gaze made her believe, even just for a moment, that maybe her voice could make a difference. The thought lingered with her as she left the room, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. The following day, the hospital was abuzz with rumors of the successful surgery and Angela's unexpected intervention. Though few staff members approached her directly, whispers circulated through the halls. Angela noticed the occasional stare or overheard a hushed conversation in the break room, her name mentioned with both curiosity and skepticism. Angela went about her day, remaining professional despite the added attention. But as she headed toward the ICU that afternoon, she was startled to see Thomas Grayson standing by the window, his gaze fixed on the bustling hospital courtyard below. He looked deep in thought, and Angela hesitated, unsure if she should interrupt. Sensing her presence, Mr. Grayson turned, his face lighting up in recognition. "Nurse Brooks," he greeted her with a warm smile. "I've been meaning to speak with you. Would you mind joining me for a few moments?" Angela nodded, still feeling the subtle weight of uncertainty as she followed him down a quieter hallway and into a private meeting room. She couldn't help but wonder why a man like Thomas Grayson, a patient who seemed to wield an unusual amount of influence in the hospital, wanted to speak with her. As they settled into chairs across from each other, Mr. Grayson folded his hands, regarding her with a steady, appraising look. "Angela," he began, his tone more familiar than before, "I want to commend you for the courage you showed during yesterday's operation." Angela felt her cheeks warm. "I was only doing what I felt was best for the patient," she replied modestly. "But thank you, Mr. Grayson." "Call me Thomas," he said with a nod. "You know, most people don't dare to speak up, especially not in a place where tradition and hierarchy seem to outweigh actual patient care." Angela's brow furrowed. "I've noticed that, yes, it's been challenging." Thomas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms thoughtfully. "I think you should know that I'm not just here for a regular checkup, Angela. I've been evaluating Lakeside Hospital on behalf of my organization, Grayson Healthcare Holdings." Angela's eyes widened. Grayson Healthcare Holdings was a renowned corporation known for investing in and restructuring healthcare facilities nationwide. The realization hit her that Thomas had likely been observing the hospital's operations more critically than any patient ever would. "Your organization evaluates hospitals?" she asked, trying to hide her surprise. "Yes," he replied. "My position allows me to observe how facilities operate and, where necessary, recommend changes or improvements. It's one thing to lead from an office, but it's entirely different to see a hospital's culture from the inside, and what I've seen here has been troubling." Angela nodded, understanding all too well what he meant. "Lakeside has its challenges, especially for someone like me," she admitted. "There's a culture of resistance here that seems hard to break." Thomas's expression grew serious. "You're not alone in recognizing that. From what I've seen, it's clear that Lakeside has room to improve, drastically, in some areas. The biases and unspoken prejudices here aren't just harmful to staff. They affect the quality of care patients receive." Angela felt a sense of relief mixed with anticipation. "But what can be done?" Thomas's gaze was unwavering. "This hospital needs leadership that prioritizes integrity and inclusion. But that won't happen unless people like you keep speaking up. I believe that with the right support, your voice could make a significant difference here." Angela sat quietly, taking in his words. The idea that she could be part of lasting change was both empowering and daunting. "I want to help," she said finally. "But it's difficult to confront something so ingrained." Thomas smiled, a look of pride in his eyes. "You've already begun that process, Angela, by showing everyone that patient care comes first. And soon, others will have to acknowledge it too. Starting tomorrow, I'll be meeting with the board to discuss some restructuring at Lakeside, including changes to training, hiring practices, and leadership. I'm confident these changes will foster a healthier work environment for all." Angela felt her pulse quicken. Thomas was planning to confront the very issues she had been struggling with alone. "What will this mean for the staff here?" she asked cautiously. "It will mean more accountability and more support for those who uphold patient care over outdated biases," he replied. "But I will need allies in this effort, Angela. People who see the hospital for what it could be, not just for what it is. Angela nodded, feeling a spark of determination. You can count on me, Thomas. I've spent my life wanting to make a difference, and if I can help bring positive change here at Lakeside, I'm ready. Thomas extended his hand, his expression resolute. Then, let's make that difference together. As Angela shook his hand, she realized that this moment marked the beginning of a profound transformation, not only for Lakeside Hospital, but for her own journey. For the first time, she felt seen, heard, and supported by someone with the power to bring change. The following morning, Angela entered Lakeside Hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. After her conversation with Thomas Grayson, she felt as if the weight of working alone in a resistant environment had been lifted. She knew that things were about to shift in ways she'd only dared to imagine. As she walked through the bustling halls, Angela noticed that the atmosphere was different. There was a tension in the air, a kind that only emerged when something important was about to happen. Staff whispered in small groups, casting furtive glances toward the administrative wing, where Thomas was scheduled to meet with the hospital board that morning. Angela's morning was filled with her usual rounds, but she couldn't shake the anticipation buzzing through her. A little before noon, she received an unexpected message asking her to join a meeting with Thomas and the board members in one of the hospital's large conference rooms. She took a deep breath, smoothed her uniform, and made her way down the hall. When Angela entered the room, she was surprised to see that it was filled not only with senior administrators but also several department heads, including Dr. Hendricks, one of the more established surgeons, and the nursing supervisors. The mood was heavy with anticipation. At the head of the table sat Thomas Grayson, who acknowledged her arrival with a nod. Thomas stood and addressed the room with his signature calm and authority. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady but carrying a noticeable weight. "My time here as a patient gave me a unique perspective on Lakeside Hospital. While I've seen some admirable dedication among our staff, it's also clear that there are areas needing immediate attention and improvement." Angela felt her heart race, yet she kept her expression neutral, mirroring Thomas's professionalism. Thomas continued, "Today I'll be outlining a plan to foster a more inclusive, collaborative, and patient-centered environment here at Lakeside. It's evident that a culture shift is necessary for both staff and patient welfare." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "We will be implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, starting from the senior staff down to the newest hires. We will also be reviewing hiring and promotion practices to ensure that all employees have equal opportunities to grow and contribute, free of bias or exclusion." Angela's heart lifted. These were changes she had wished for ever since she arrived. But she also noticed the varying expressions around the table. Some of the older staff members looked apprehensive, even defensive, while others seemed intrigued or cautiously optimistic. Dr. Hendricks shifted in his seat and raised his hand, clearing his throat. "Mr. Grayson, while I appreciate the intent here, I must ask, how do you envision these changes impacting our daily operations? We are a busy hospital with limited resources." Thomas nodded, clearly expecting some resistance. "I understand, Dr. Hendricks, and I assure you, this plan is designed to enhance operations, not hinder them. A collaborative workplace is a more efficient one. When employees feel respected and valued, the benefits ripple outward, to the patients, their families, and our staff as a whole." There was a murmur of agreement from a few people at the table, though others still looked skeptical. To Angela's surprise, Thomas gestured for her to speak. "Angela," he said, meeting her gaze encouragingly, "I think the team would benefit from hearing your perspective." Angela took a deep breath and nodded, choosing her words carefully. "When I joined Lakeside, I quickly noticed that some staff members seemed closed off to me, based on assumptions or stereotypes. This created a barrier not just between me and them, but in the quality of care we're providing together. These changes aren't about placing blame. They're about ensuring every patient receives the best care, supported by a staff that values each other." There was silence as her words hung in the air. She could feel eyes on her, but she forced herself to hold her ground. Dr. Hendricks looked away, avoiding her gaze, while a few other staff members nodded thoughtfully. Thomas resumed, his tone confident. Our goal is to ensure that Lakeside remains a leader in healthcare. That requires commitment from all of us to embrace change and grow together. We're moving forward with this plan, and I'm counting on each of you to support this journey. With the meeting wrapping up, the board members and administrators exited the room one by one, many of them still processing the discussion. Angela noticed a few of the nurses giving her small nods of approval as they passed by. After everyone had left, Thomas approached her. "Thank you, Angela. Your words were exactly what they needed to hear." Angela smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "Thank you, Thomas, for giving me the chance to speak. This change, it's what Lakeside truly needs." Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression one of genuine appreciation. "This is only the beginning, Angela. Keep doing what you're doing, and remember, you're not alone in this anymore." As Angela walked out of the conference room, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. For the first time, she was part of something bigger, something transformative that would redefine Lakeside Hospital for years to come. With renewed determination, Angela returned to her rounds, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that this time, real change was finally on the horizon. Angela's first day stepping into her new role as Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator at Lakeside Hospital began with a surge of excitement and nerves. As she walked into the administrative wing, she reminded herself of the many conversations with Thomas Grayson, the promises of support and the trust he had placed in her to help guide Lakeside into a new chapter. She knew it was a heavy responsibility, but for Angela, the chance to contribute to meaningful change in her workplace felt like a rare opportunity she was determined not to waste. Her first meeting of the day was with the nursing supervisors, a group of seasoned professionals with a deep commitment to the hospital's legacy and its patients. As she entered the conference room, the supervisors greeted her with mixed expressions, some of curiosity, others of skepticism. Angela returned their greetings warmly and took her seat, meeting their gaze with quiet confidence. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "As you know, Mr. Grayson and the administration have asked me to lead the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative here at Lakeside. My goal isn't to change who we are as a team, but rather to help us grow together. I believe that through understanding and support we can create a work environment that brings out the best in all of us, and ultimately allows us to provide better care for our patients." One of the supervisors, a woman named Margaret who had been at Lakeside for over 2 decades, nodded, though Angela could see hesitation in her eyes. "I've seen a lot of changes over the years," Margaret said carefully, "but I also know that change can be difficult for people. I guess I'm wondering, how do you intend to implement this?" Angela smiled, encouraged by Margaret's willingness to engage. "It's natural to feel that way," she replied, her tone empathetic. "We're going to start with a series of workshops on cultural competence led by trained facilitators. These sessions will allow everyone to share their perspectives openly and learn from each other. No one will be asked to change who they are. Instead, we'll focus on growing our empathy and understanding, which I believe will strengthen our team." Angela noticed several heads nodding around the table. Margaret offered a faint smile, the tension in her expression easing. Encouraged, Angela continued, outlining plans for ongoing check-ins and feedback sessions, as well as creating a resource library with articles, books, and other educational materials on diversity in healthcare. After the meeting, Angela headed to her office, a modest but quiet space where she could focus on the complex work ahead. She'd barely sat down when her phone buzzed. It was Thomas Grayson. "Angela," he began, his tone warm, "I wanted to check in. How did your first meeting go?" Angela smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude for his support. "Better than I expected," she replied. "There's still some hesitancy, but I think they're open to seeing where this goes." "Good to hear," Thomas said. "Take it one step at a time, and remember, I'm here if you need anything. Change doesn't happen overnight, but with the right foundation we can build something lasting." With Thomas's encouragement fueling her, Angela dove into the work. Throughout the week she met with different departments, explaining her role and listening to any concerns or questions the staff had. She was surprised to find how many people wanted to talk, to share their own stories of feeling out of place or underestimated, and their hope that her new position could make a difference. One evening, as she prepared to leave, she ran into Sarah, a nurse who'd once been distant but was now one of Angela's most supportive colleagues. "Hey, Angela," Sarah greeted her, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I just wanted to say, I think what you're doing here really matters. I never really thought about some of these issues before, but since you started, I've been paying attention and, well, it's opened my eyes. So, thank you." Angela felt a swell of pride and gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah, that means a lot. I'm glad to know this is starting to resonate." By the end of her first week, Angela was exhausted but energized, confident that she was making a meaningful impact, even if only in small steps. She knew there was still resistance from some, but she was determined to approach her new role with the same empathy, patience, and resolve that had guided her thus far. That weekend, as she reflected on the whirlwind of new responsibilities and conversations, Angela allowed herself a quiet moment of pride. She was no longer just a nurse fighting her own battle. She was a part of a larger mission, one that had the potential to bring about genuine change at Lakeside. With a renewed sense of purpose, Angela knew she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in her journey toward building a more inclusive, compassionate workplace. The following month at Lakeside Hospital saw a transformation that Angela could hardly have imagined when she first started her new role. Her diversity and inclusion workshops had become a fixture, not only drawing steady attendance but sparking conversations that spilled into break rooms, the cafeteria, and even the hallways. Angela began to sense a genuine shift as staff members opened up and shared their experiences, revealing layers of understanding she had hoped to inspire. One evening, after finishing a particularly moving workshop session, Angela was approached by Dr. Roberts, one of Lakeside's more reserved senior physicians. She'd always sensed his hesitation towards her initiatives, and while he had been polite, she hadn't expected him to warm to the changes she was advocating. "Angela," Dr. Roberts started, his voice soft but steady, "I wanted to thank you. Honestly, I wasn't sure what all this talk of inclusion would accomplish. But in one of your sessions, I realized I'd been holding on to biases I didn't even know I had. It was uncomfortable," he admitted, shifting his stance, "but I think it's making me a better doctor in person." Angela felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you for saying that, Dr. Roberts. It takes courage to confront our own biases. I'm grateful that you were open to it." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "This hospital is better with you here, Angela. I know that now." As Dr. Roberts walked away, Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose. That single moment marked a shift not only for her but for Lakeside itself. Dr. Roberts's acknowledgement felt like validation, a sign that her work was truly having an impact. The next day, Angela was invited to sit in on an administrative meeting led by Thomas Grayson. When she entered the room, the usual formal atmosphere was tinged with something else, a feeling of expectancy as if everyone knew a pivotal moment was about to unfold. After a few preliminary discussions, Thomas addressed the room. "As you know, Angela has been working diligently on our diversity and inclusion efforts, and the results have been nothing short of transformative. Today, I'd like to propose something to continue this momentum." Angela's heart quickened as she listened. Thomas explained his vision for embedding the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative into every aspect of Lakeside's policies and practices. He proposed that each department would designate a diversity liaison, who would report directly to Angela. This new structure would give her insights from all corners of the hospital, amplifying her reach and strengthening her impact. Angela looked around the room, catching the eyes of the staff and department heads. There were nods of agreement, and for the first time, visible excitement among her colleagues. "Angela, I'm placing this trust in you because of the dedication and compassion you've shown," Thomas continued. "We're ready to support you in creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and respected." Taking a steadying breath, Angela addressed the room. "Thank you, Thomas, and thank you all. I believe Lakeside can be a model for inclusive healthcare, and I'm honored to help us reach that goal. This isn't just my work. It's something we're building together." Applause filled the room, and Angela felt the energy shift once more. The hospital that had once been a place of daily trials was now filled with hope and possibility. Leaving the meeting, she was overwhelmed by the support she felt from every corner of the institution. As Angela walked down the hallway that day, she realized Lakeside was reaching its turning point, and so was she. With the team behind her and a foundation for lasting change, she felt more hopeful than ever that the work they were doing would outlast her time there, shaping a legacy of compassion and equality. Months passed, and the atmosphere at Lakeside Hospital continued to evolve. Angela watched with pride as her initiatives took root and flourished in ways she had once only dreamed of. The diversity and inclusion liaisons from each department met regularly with her, bringing forward both challenges and inspiring stories of progress. These meetings had become a hub of shared learning, a space where empathy and accountability blended seamlessly into the hospital's mission. Angela's influence had grown beyond Lakeside's walls. Word of the hospital's transformation had spread, and healthcare facilities from nearby towns had started reaching out to her, eager to learn how they, too, could foster an inclusive environment. It was both humbling and exhilarating knowing the changes she had fought so hard for were rippling outward, touching lives beyond her immediate circle. One afternoon, as Angela was reviewing a report from the diversity team, Thomas Grayson stopped by her office. He looked as composed as ever, but there was a new warmth in his expression, one Angela had come to associate with his growing respect and appreciation for her work. "Angela," he began, taking a seat across from her desk, "I wanted to let you know that Lakeside has been recognized by the State Health Board for its strides in fostering an inclusive workplace. They've requested that we present our approach at the upcoming conference. They want you to lead it." Angela felt a wave of gratitude and excitement. She had worked so hard to build this culture, and the acknowledgement meant that their story could inspire others on an even larger scale. "Thank you, Thomas. I'll do my best to represent what we've built here," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. The conference was held in a grand hall, and as Angela stood at the podium looking out at the crowd of healthcare professionals, administrators, and policymakers, she felt a deep sense of purpose. She spoke not only about Lakeside's programs, but also about the power of true inclusion, the kind that moved beyond policies and permeated every interaction, every decision, every act of care. After the presentation, Angela was met with a flurry of questions and requests for advice. In that moment, she realized her work was no longer about just changing Lakeside, but about inspiring a movement toward lasting change in healthcare institutions everywhere. When she returned to Lakeside, Angela was greeted by a group of colleagues who had gathered to congratulate her. Among them was Dr. Roberts, who stepped forward and extended his hand with a genuine smile. "Thank you, Angela, for changing this place. You've not only made us better professionals, but better people." Angela smiled, feeling the warmth and camaraderie that now filled the hospital halls. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "It's all of us, working together." The weeks that followed were filled with the steady, fulfilling work of embedding this new culture even deeper into the fabric of Lakeside. Angela knew that the path to meaningful, lasting change was ongoing, but she also knew that she had built something solid, something that would endure long after her. Looking around the hospital at her colleagues and the patients who now felt welcomed and respected, Angela felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had created a legacy, one that would continue to inspire, grow, and impact lives for years to come. As Angela stepped out of Lakeside Hospital, she felt a profound sense of purpose. She had arrived facing obstacles, but her journey had ignited real change. Lakeside was no longer just a hospital. It was a community where every patient and staff member was valued for who they were. She knew that the seeds of compassion, courage, and unity she had sown would continue to flourish. Angela's story reminds us that resilience and kindness have the power to transform even the most challenging circumstances. If her journey inspired you, remember that each of us holds the potential to create a positive impact. Let's carry this spirit of change forward together. Thank you for being a part of this story. If you'd like more uplifting tales like Angela's, be sure to hit subscribe. Let's continue to inspire one another.